I think there are a lot of people still trying to find the Human Rights Action Centre because it's the first time we've used this as a venue. Yeah, but we need to start anyway. We've got quite a lot of people would like to speak this evening. So my name is Patricia Bartley. I'm the Amnesty International UK Country Coordinator for Ethiopia, part of the Amnesty International UK team for the Eastern Horn of Africa. So I have to do the couple of things. The fire exit, just this door here beside the stage. Toilets, you may have found them through these main doors and down the stairs. And if you have phones, please switch them off and put them on silent. So this evening's event has been organised by myself here at Amnesty International and the Costa Club under the auspices of the All-Party Parliamentary Third World Solidarity Group. The Costa Club is made up of representatives from different civic and political groups and individuals in the UK who all share an interest in Ethiopia. The group started about 2 years ago, and our aim is to raise awareness of human rights violations and to work together, speaking as one voice, to campaign for democracy, human rights and the rule of law in Ethiopia. So, welcome to this evening. We have brought together a variety of speakers and voices to highlight some of the current human rights violations occurring in Ethiopia. The speakers will speak for about up to a maximum of 10 minutes, and then we really hope to allow lots of time for your questions, comments, and a discussion at the end. So just bear with me because our first speaker will be coming via Skype, and I just need to quickly go over the control panel.
Shall I introduce you?
Yeah. Oh, actually, if you, yeah.
The first speaker is Felix Hall, who is the researcher for Human Rights Watch for Ethiopia. He has spent the last few years interviewing refugees in the Horn of Africa from Ethiopia and getting information from the horse's mouth, so to speak. He's collated a lot of information about the killings and imprisonments and disappearances that have occurred in the last few months in Oromia region. They killed at least 400 protesting students. And that report is available on the Human Rights Watch website. There's also a very recent comment, press release by Human Rights Watch on Ethiopia's accession to the UN Security Council as a temporary member, which of course we do not applaud at all. Okay, are we okay with Felix? Good evening, Felix.
Good evening, Trevor.
Okay, you have been introduced right royally, so can you give us a few minutes' worth of your recent experiences? Thank you, Felix.
Sure. Thanks, Trevor. It's good to be here. I want to talk a little bit about the protests that have swept through Oromia, which is Ethiopia's largest region. For those that aren't familiar with Oromia, it's home to at least 35 million people, many of them ethnic Oromos. Surrounds the capital Addis Ababa on 4 sides. And ethnic Oromos claim marginalization and discrimination from successive Ethiopian governments, including this current one. The protests that swept through Oromia, we believe there's been over 500 individual protests. This ranges from several dozen individuals to many more, to hundreds, possibly thousands in several locations. We believe that over 400 of those protesters have been killed by security forces. Now, the protests were originally triggered over the Addis Ababa Master Plan, which was this urban plan designed to manage the growth of Addis. So by all accounts, Addis has been booming, been growing spatially for about a decade now. And one of the concerns the protesters had with that is that those Oromo farmers that lived in the vicinity of Addis were being displaced from their land without any compensation, without any consultation, and without any meaningful alternate land or alternate livelihoods being considered or found for them. Now, the conduct by security forces was disproportionate. I mean, the force was excessive, it was lethal. They used live ammunition to contain many of these protests. The protests were predominantly peaceful. There were some acts of violence by protesters, but very, very few, given the scale and breadth of the protest movement. We believe, as I mentioned, that over 400 individuals have been killed, tens of thousands detained. Many of those detained were detained for very short periods of time, but there are still many that are in detention without a charge of any type. In general terms, the arrests followed three different patterns. The first was during the protests. Quite often, tear gas was fired. Security forces would go in with sticks, beating protesters. And as I mentioned, sometimes live ammunition was used. And security forces would just arrest whoever they could during these protests. Then secondly, at night, security forces went door to door looking for individuals that may have been involved in the protests. So this was usually young students, elementary and secondary school, or those that were harboring or accused of harboring students. So there were many arrests there. And the third group was in the weeks and sometimes months following the protests, where influential Oromos were rounded up. And that ranged from influential Oromos within classrooms, so older students who the government believed might have been mobilizing other students to protest, or teachers, in some cases, Oromo business people, and also artists and musicians who had the ability to mobilize Oromos through their work. And this went all the way up to the federal level, where a number of politicians were also arrested. And I think one individual who kind of encapsulates this is Bekele Garba. Bekele is the deputy chairperson of the Oromo Federalist Congress, the OFC. They are the largest legally registered opposition party in Oromia. So Bekele was arrested with about 20 other senior members of OFC in December 2015. Shortly thereafter, he was charged under the anti-terrorism law, and his trial continues. And for those that know Bekele, Bekele is a staunch advocate for nonviolence. He believed passionately that the way forward for Oromos to have their grievances dealt with is through non-violent means. So to have him arrested and be charged under the anti-terrorism law sends a very dangerous message to those young protesters. Now, those individuals that were in detention describe various forms of mistreatment, ranging from beatings with sticks and whips to just very horrible forms of torture. The patterns that we found and are documented in the report, which I think Trevor mentioned is on our website, are very similar to those patterns that are documented in Amnesty's excellent 2014 report, Because I Am Oromo. This is something that we see that it doesn't seem to matter when abuses are documented, the patterns that are very similar in different places of detention within Oromia. Now, the DFID, the Department for International Development, puts a lot of money into Ethiopia. Various development programs, including health, education, roads, food security. And these protests have had a massive impact on education and on the ability for individuals to go to school. In many of the protest locations, schools were closed because that is where government believed the protests were starting from. In other locations, police and sometimes the army were occupying the schools, so students did not feel comfortable coming to school. In some cases, students were just afraid to go to school because of the potential for arrest. One grade 8 student at a school in Southern Oromia, I think, summarized the scale of the impact of education quite effectively. She said that the 28 people in her class, only 4 were left. So 12 had been arrested and the whereabouts were unknown. 3 had been arrested and released. 4 had fled the community. been killed by a bullet. 2 were injured, and the whereabouts of 2 others were not known. Now, their teacher had also been arrested, and the class was no longer taking place. I managed to interview her outside of Ethiopia. She decided to run away, not because of the threats that took place during the protest, but more because of the lack of education. The government's response to this has varied quite a bit. In January, the government announced the cancellation of the master plan. This is very rare concessions, and the government was not used to making concessions. But there was not a single protester that I interviewed who believed the government would follow through on those plans to cancel. And by the time the cancellation announcement came, the concerns of protesters were no longer just about the master plan, but also about the conduct of security forces, the deaths and arrests of young students, and from decades of historical grievances. Now, to me, the rural protests are a good example of what can happen when there is no way to peacefully express dissent. So in Ethiopia, if you have a concern over something like the outside of a master plan, there's very little in the way of independent civil society that can advocate for you. You know, the Charities and Societies Proclamation of 2009 took care of that. Basically decimated the independent civil society. There's very little in the way of independent media that will cover these stories. There's very little in the way of, there's no opposition parliamentarians. You know, the ruling EPRDF has 100% of the parliamentary seats at both the federal and the regional levels. The courts are not remotely independent when it comes to these sorts of political cases. So there's really no way to have your opinions expressed peacefully. What you're left with is going to the streets to protest. And we see from the protests in Oromia, where security forces largely treated protesters as a military operation, but that's no longer an option. And a lot of young students I talk to, express this. So we're told that we need to remain nonviolent. Well, our leaders who tell us to be nonviolent are accused of terrorism, and there's no other way for us to express our grievances. So what are we left with? Everything the government is doing is leading us on a violent path, and that's a very dangerous trajectory for Ethiopia. Now, I didn't hear the introduction, but one thing that is very evident in doing advocacy in Ethiopia is that Ethiopia has a very strong relationship with Western countries, including the United Kingdom. The nature of that relationship depends a lot on the country that we're talking about, but it includes partnerships on development, on migration, on security. The fact that Ethiopia is home to the African Union also strengthens the relationship with the West. And then most recently, Ethiopia was voted as a member, a non-permanent member of the Security Council, which will strengthen Ethiopia's standing internationally. All of this makes it more difficult to gain traction on improving Ethiopia's dismal human rights record. Now, for the United Kingdom, one of the things that we continuously say is that the silent approach to dealing with Ethiopia on human rights, the idea that if you want to have progress, you have this quiet, respectful discussion behind closed doors in an attempt to get them to move in the right direction, it's just not working. I mean, we've heard this from the UK and from other countries for many years, and Ethiopia's human rights trajectory just gets worse and worse and worse. So it's time for a different approach, time for the UK to speak more vocally and assertively about these brutal crackdowns. Any human rights group, including Rights Watch, would call for an independent, credible investigation into the crackdowns that have been happening in Oromia, and that any individuals who are found to be responsible should be held to account. What's the UK Minister for Africa has said in Parliament is that the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission has the responsibility to carry out such an investigation, and that they will wait for the results of that investigation before deciding on what further action needs to be taken by the UK government. Well, 2 weeks ago, the Human Rights Commission submitted their reports to Parliament. We haven't seen a copy. Nobody I'm talking to has actually seen a copy, including some Ethiopian parliamentarians. But nonetheless, it verbally delivered its findings to Parliament. and it found that the use of force was proportionate to the threat. It found that the protesters were armed, and that the use of force was proportionate. So this is a stark contrast to our findings, to the findings of any other NGO or journalist or anyone else that's managed to investigate. So certainly we'd like the UK to take a firm response to that report and to push for a credible independent investigation, ideally with some international support. I think I've gone way over my time, so I'll leave it.
Thank you, Felix. Felix will stay for some questions towards the end, yeah? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And our next speaker is Rosa Kirby, a solicitor from Lee Day Solicitors. She works in the Human Rights Department of that firm. She's a specialist in public law, judicial review and human rights cases. She has challenged governments and international bodies, including European courts of justice and human rights, UK courts at several levels, including the Supreme Court, and the Department for International Development withdrew its support for the Protection of Basic Services programme in Ethiopia after Rosa applied for judicial review of DFID's support for the public services, the Protection of Basic Services programme, following the eviction of the farmer, Mr. O, in this case, who you may have heard of. And Rosa is also now concerned with the illegal rendition of Andargachuk Sike, a British resident, to Ethiopia. So over to Rosa. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the work I've been doing, which has been touching on the relationship between the UK and Ethiopia. Do you want me to bring this up? So just to give you a little bit of background about the work that I do, you may all know a lot already about judicial review, but I think it might just be useful just to explain a little bit what that process is. So as Trevor very kindly said, I'm a public lawyer. What that means is I challenge decisions taken by public bodies in the UK or international courts. And it's about whether UK public bodies are basically applying the law. So it's not about whether a decision that they've taken is correct politically or correct ethically. It's about whether they're complying with their legal obligations when they're taking decisions regarding individuals or projects. So the two cases that I was going to chat to you about today, one is, they're both what Trevor's already mentioned. One was on behalf of an individual that we took to the High Court, an individual who we had to get anonymity for because of his concerns about what might happen to him if his name came out publicly. This is a man who used to live in Gambela in Ethiopia and was basically forced off his land with brutality as part of something called a villagisation programme. That villagisation programme was partly funded by something called PBS money, which the UK DFID, the public body arm of the UK government, which distributes aid money, was providing UK taxpayers' money into. So we challenged that decision by the UK public body to provide funding for that programme on behalf of Mr. O, because we said that decision to provide that funding was unlawful. DFID itself has some very clear policies about the basis and the circumstances in which they can provide public money. And we said this particular programme breached those policies. So we went to court and said DFID isn't following its own obligations in relation to decisions of when and in what circumstances public money should be given to regimes and authorities like Ethiopian authorities. We took that decision to the High Court. We had a hearing listed in the High Court, and the government decided to announce the withdrawal of the funding to the PBS programme. So our case was never heard, so the legal arguments were never heard by a court, but obviously it resulted in the UK money being withdrawn from that programme. So Mr O was delighted with that, as were we, but it does mean a lot of the legal arguments that we were putting forward about the circumstances in which aid money can be provided weren't heard. And I suspect they may come back in a different case kind of in due course. But there are, I think, lots of questions remaining, particularly about the process by which DFID assesses human rights compliance. So in the case of Mr O, there was a suggestion by DFID that they had done an assessment about the human rights risks involved in the provision of this funding. And we were saying that assessment wasn't sufficient. So there are some, from a legal perspective, some interesting kind of procedural and process questions, I think, that are left unanswered because of the very welcomed decision by DFID to withdraw funding to PBS and the Ethiopian authorities in that way. As Trevor said, I'm now involved in a case with Yemi and her daughter, which is a challenge to, this time, to the Secretary of State for the FCO in relation to the decisions taken about Mr. Tsiki. And maybe I'll just explain a little bit of detail about that. I suspect most of you are aware of Mr. Tsiki's case. He's obviously a British citizen who was granted refugee status by us in recognition of the fact of his political opinion and what had the Ethiopian authorities had been and were threatening to do in relation to him. He was kidnapped, and I use that word very intentionally, in Yemen and then taken to Ethiopia. He was held in solitary confinement for 22 months, and we're told is being held in relation to a death penalty sentence that was handed down against him in absentia. We are challenging the refusal of the Secretary of State to seek his immediate release and return back to the UK. What the government is saying at the moment is that the Secretary of State has made a number of overtures to the Ethiopian authorities asking for Mr. Tsiki to secure for him due process in Ethiopia. We understand what that means to the Secretary of State is that Mr. Tsiki must be entitled to challenge the legal basis for his detention in accordance with international principles. We're challenging that decision. We're saying that decision is unlawful. And it's unlawful because we don't think any reasonable decision maker could possibly consider there was a reasonable prospect for Mr. Tsiki to receive proper, internationally respected due process in Ethiopia. We don't think there's any chance of the Egyptian court system providing him with that due process. We also think that the Secretary of State have failed to recognise that Mr. Tsiki was kidnapped in Yemen. And that failure is unlawful because it's clear, in our view, on the evidence that's available, that he was kidnapped in Yemen and rendered to Ethiopia. And we say that failure to recognise that is also unlawful. We also say that there is a failure by the Secretary of State, by seeking due process, to recognise the gravity of the international law principles and breaches of international law that Mr. Tsiki's abduction and continued detention basically represent. And the idea that he can go through due process in those circumstances fails to recognise the international legal obligations that the UK government has. And we say the only response, the only lawful response that the UK government can have to Mr. Tsiki's kidnap, rendition and ongoing detention in Ethiopia is to seek his immediate release and return to the UK. And the failure to do that, we say, is unlawful. And we're asking the court to make a declaration telling the UK Secretary of State that he must do that, and his failure to do that to date is unlawful. That case is still in some ways at the beginning of the process. We've issued proceedings in the High Court, we've had a response from the Secretary of State, we're drafting a reply, and then we're waiting for a decision from the court on permission. So judicial review is a slightly strange area of law, but there's a two-stage process. Before you can have a full hearing, you have to get permission to have a hearing, and it's that decision that we're waiting for at the moment, and we're hoping will come relatively soon. We obviously hope we'll get permission, and then the next stage is to have a substantive hearing where the government will set out why they think they're right, and we'll set out why we think we're right, and then the judge will make a decision on whether they'll grant us the declaration that we're seeking. Yemi, I've no doubt will talk to you much better about the case than me, but that's some of the legal kind of background to the challenge.
Thank you very much, Rosa. Now, Rosa has to go before the Q&A panel gets underway later on, but before we open the floor for questions to Rosa, I would like Yemi to speak, because what she has to say is the personal side of Andar Gachu's rendition and detention and torture in Ethiopia. Yemi is a fantastic advocate for human rights. She's been a member of the Costa Club and has been pushing Andar Gachu's case phenomenally well over the last 2 years. And it's a delight having her on board on the Costa Club. So perhaps, Yemi, you could say a couple of words about the personal impact of this, and then we can go on to 5 or 10 minutes of question and answer while Rosa is here with us, and then we'll go on to the other speakers. So, Yemi.
Thank you very much. I'm going to speak about what kind of impact this has had and what kind of expectations we had when we initially found out that he was detained in Yemen. We assumed that he was detained in Yemen and it was some kind of immigration hiccup. And after 7 days of blackout, we found out that he had been transferred to Ethiopia. I don't have to tell a lot of people in this room what that meant when we actually physically found out that he had been transferred. When I got the phone call from the FCO, I never thought in my wildest dream that the Ethiopian government would stretch that far and be that arrogant and that, and abuse international law in that way and render somebody from all the way from Yemen. But more importantly, what has really disappointed me in all this is the UK's dealing with the case. They initially, when they found out, when they wrote them a letter saying that this is an actual kidnap and that they should be demanding his return, the response we got from the FCO was that he was transferred at best in suspicious circumstances. And for me, that was very heartbreaking and was a start of continuous argument over the facts of the case. And that is very disheartening. What happened has happened, and when the UK government is refusing to acknowledge what happened because they do not want to fulfill their obligation, you do wonder why do they have to do that? So I do get very worried when Felix and the others are very much hoping that the West, the UK, will do anything at all in the kind of abuses that are happening within Ethiopia when they can't even do it for their own national, and when the clear facts are on the case and there's absolutely no doubt what had happened, they can't even acknowledge. So it's been a very, very long journey, and there are amazing people like Rosa and Reprieve that are very much helping. I know I'm not being very coherent and
because a lot of you know the case, that's why I don't really want to go into the details of the facts and the timeline of the case that are helping us in this. And the Foreign Secretary was in Ethiopia last month, and I had high hopes. Again, you know, like you live with hope, you know, like I had very, very high hopes that because he's been, like he said, he's done a lot of overtures towards the Ethiopian governments, and he's been personally involved. I thought he would be finally outraged. You know, after 22 months, he hasn't really had any movement at all in the case. Even what they think is an achievement, which is the consular access, that's not regular. There has to always be an intervention from here for the consular access to be granted. He's not even seen a medical doctor to date. He is an infected incommunicado even now because there's only 2 cellmates that he has in a very, very small and confined space. So not much has changed in 22 months. And so I thought when he went to Ethiopia, he was actually looking for a real shift in the case. Instead, what he did was he tweeted saying that he's in fact not being ill-treated. I don't know how he's able to declare that. And he's secured due process. And when you ask what that due process is, they say that now he has a right to be able to ask for a lawyer. I've secured that option. You know, it was very heartbreaking. I don't even want to say what I said to the Foreign Office. But yeah, we just have to keep plowing away and see what it takes us. But it is very, very sad when you have to fight this hard for your basic rights. It absolutely is very heartbreaking. And so hopefully we'll be making some changes soon.
Thank you very much. If there are any questions for Rosa and Yemi about Andaragachu's case and Mr. Oak's case, and just taking the Department for International Development and Foreign Commonwealth Office to court, then now is your opportunity to ask these questions before Rosa has to go further. Yes.
Hi, thank you.
Chairman, I'm not only representing what Costa Club is, but I'm representing here all-party parliamentary group on Third World Solidarity, which I'm coordinator. And I'm very pleased that I've got Professor Victoria Godard at the end. She will speak to you because I have to leave as well at some stage. And I will go with Rosa because I have promised to leave at 8:20, but now I'll leave at 8:30. Sandra Setley, who is sitting here, and there is another American lady, I think Sandra, she wants to speak to you because she was in Ethiopia and she's a founder member of Third World Solidarity in Ethiopia at the age of 17 and lived there for 1 year. It is a long time ago, but that is true. But can I start by saying to you my personal experience? I came to this country in 1981, running away from General Ziaul Haq. He took over exactly 2 days on 5th of July 1977, Pakistan, in overfusal of Kali Bhutto. And I just wanted to relate my experiences with you as a Ethiopian people living in the United Kingdom. When I came here, the government of Britain was like a brick wall. They will not listen. Because they said, we are fighting Russians in Afghanistan, and that is our main objective. I have attended many meetings, briefing by DFID and Foreign Office over the last 6-7 years since I have got involved in Ethiopian affairs. Since 9th of June 2009, when we held first meeting in House of Parliament, and usually today is the first meeting we are holding here in Amnesty International, but I hope, Patricia, it is not the last one. We will hold many other when we will invite parliamentarians. And today I have invited some parliamentarians, they promised. But I think everybody knows what is happening in the parliament. After Brexit referendum, everybody is in a very difficult situation. So they are trying to deal with their own issues, then coming here and dealing with the issues of Ethiopia. I'm also very pleased that on Third World Solidarity and Costa Club is Kefale Almo, who is from Ethiopia and has been living in this country. So I think first of all, every time when we ask questions on human rights from these civil servants, whether they are from DFID or Foreign Office or the minister, they respond back. And they have been asked many times by Dave Anderson, who is our chairman of all-party parliamentary group, to the Secretary of State, to the Minister, and I think Trevor and Kefale and Patricia has some of the answers by FCO on that. And their main concern at the moment is a security, not human rights. It used to be that human rights were number one for the Western world, but now it has become security. In 70s and 80s, it was the Russian communism, but now it has become the security. So Ethiopia, in their eyes, or in the Western world eyes, is the most stable country at the moment in the region. And that's why they will not listen to you. Their answer always come back, we are aware of human rights situation, and as I said, Dave Anderson has asked not one time, but many times, questions on Ethiopian human rights in the last 6-7 years. He is our chairman and many other MPs. Even a couple of EDM has been moved. EDM means early day motion. And madam, can I tell you, anything you want from the Parliament or Foreign Office or DFID, go to your local MP. Ask him or her to write on behalf of you, and I'm pretty sure pretty sure that Rosa will agree with me that if a parliamentarian write to the Foreign Office, they are obliged to give him the right answer, and then you can go and ask him. So it is on you. The whole onus lies on Ethiopian and us, human rights activists living in the United Kingdom. Go to your MP, ask them questions, ask them to ask a question from the Parliament. So it is very important that we, the Ethiopian and human rights lovers, become more active in the United Kingdom, work with Patricia, work with Rosa, work with Yami and Trevor and everybody who is around to go to your parliamentarian, whether it is MP, your local councillor or mayor. So it is very important that we become active, and then they will start listening to us. I think, let me thank Patricia and Amnesty International on behalf of all party parliament group and Costa Club for organizing this event for us. Can we have a big clap for Patricia and let me conclude, as I promised, I wouldn't speak much, and I hope Sandra and Kefale and Victoria will represent Third World Solidarity in our party parliamentary group. But I'm very pleased that British government sometimes look at you. If you are active and you are working for human rights, my CV is based on my political work and charitable work back in my own country, Pakistan. I think you all know that present situation in Pakistan and the whole world is based on that bloody General Ziaullah who started it. And today you are facing in Ethiopia, a lot of people are facing in the Middle East. This whole migration issue is based on that which started from Pakistan and Afghanistan, as we all know, fighting against communism. I think we have to keep an eye on Western world and their double standards. Sometimes they leave resolution passed by United Nations for 60, 70 years. You can see Palestine, you can see Kashmir, but sometimes they force their resolution through force in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and I think we, the people of Britain, have to keep an eye and become more actively involved in the politics of this country. So let's do that, and next time when we hold this meeting here in Amnesty International in House of Parliament, we go to our local MP and ask him, I'm coming, you have to come. And I'm sure they will definitely come and attend this meeting and speak and listen to you what you are saying. It is a very disgrace to the British government, and we should say it very loudly, that a citizen of Britain with young children, and it has been already publicized on BBC and all national media, is sitting in the prison of Ethiopia and they are doing nothing. Thank you very much, and I hope you
Now to film from Graham People.
Engaged as a resident of the United States in North Carolina, am I correct? Yes. And he's been engaged as a human rights advocate from his student days until now. And he uses different forms of art to reflect on and transform his interpretations of Ethiopian and Afro-American identity and social justice. So, I'll hand it to you. Yeah?
Thank you. May I say thank you very much for this opportunity, and of course I would very much like to thank the organizers for this human rights issue-oriented discussion. It is not my wish to share my artwork with you today, but nevertheless a very important aspect of human rights that is heavily abused in Ethiopia. What the fundamental problems that I would like to address is that Ethiopia is at a crossroads, and the donor and diplomatic community, the UN system and the African Union, whose seat is in Addis, can no longer afford to sit by and watch one of the most brutal and divisive regimes in Africa punish citizens and aggravate an already tense situation. Continuity of the current state-sponsored atrocity will only create conditions for Ethiopia's fragmentation and an ethnic inferno in one of the most volatile regions in the world. Human rights violations are indivisible. It is disingenuous and unhelpful to Ethiopian victims that domestic and foreign human rights groups, governments, investors, aid groups, and others treat human rights violation against specific ethnic and religious groups in isolation from one another. Ethiopians suffer from an entire suffocating state and government system. Evidence shows that the Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF, that dominates the ethnic ruling coalition, the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front. This way, it localizes and ethnicizes the issue, one group at a time, reinforce division and ensures minority ethnic elite ruled by crushing peaceful protest and dissent, as we have heard repeatedly by speakers this evening. Treating each incident in isolation does therefore instead strengthens the government's divide and rule policy. In the process, it emboldens extremist, separatist, and fundamental forces. The system is designed not to encourage cooperation and solidarity, but divide and crush Ethiopian opposition groups. In light of the opposition groups are fearful to collaborate and lobby the global community. The struggle for democratic transformation is therefore fragmented and weak. However, the group that I joined, and be proud to say, Shango, believes that regardless of its ethnic or religious affiliation, all Ethiopians face atrocities from the same punishing police, state, and government. Most Ethiopians, specifically youth, prefer to leave their country. The dangers we see two dangers on the horizon: Ethiopia's fragmentation and possible ethnic genocide precipitated by 25 years of a failed ethnic federal system. This system has allowed ethnic elites to create the illusion of separate and independent nations. The consequence is the illusion of separate and independent nations is that the disinstitutionalization of a genuine multi-ethnic, pluralist, and democratic federal system that strengthens socio-economic cohesion, synergy, and complementarity, economic growth, is totally uneven, as it were. Income and wealth is concentrated in a few hands. Ethiopia has one of the worst features of income and wealth inequality in the world. According to a Gallup poll, the government of Ethiopia is among the least trusted in Africa. Ethiopia is among the largest sources of migration in the entire continent. At the same time, it hosts hundreds of thousands of refugees from Eritrean, north and south of Sudan and Somalia. I wanted to talk about abject poverty because I have a whole lot to say. I'm going to make this perhaps much shorter. I would like to talk about commitment by donors and diplomatic community. Shango wishes to impress upon the global community that human rights violations, harassments, jailing, beating, maiming, forcible eviction, and ethnic cleansing won't stop until and unless donors in the diplomatic community addresses these issues in their totality or national character. It is not helpful, in our view, to focus on the plight of one ethnic or social or political or religious group in isolation from the rest. In fact, isolated treatment helps the repressive regime rather than the victims. Isolated treatment of atrocities detract from the larger system issue of repression. Among other things, it singles out opponents and enables the regime to them, one to the other at a time. The wholesale imprisonment of Oromo opponents and military control of hot regions is evidence of this phenomenon. Almost all Ethiopians throughout the country suffer from state-sponsored terrorism and repression. I would like to address some issues, but basically what I would like to see happen would not be addressed in 2 minutes, but I will try my best. We urge Ethiopia's friends in the donor, diplomatic, and NGO community to give teeth to their values by speaking out publicly and privately now on the following concrete and urgent issues. Call on Prime Minister Haile Mariam government to halt recurrent and repressive massive crackdowns on peaceful dissent and allow peaceful protest as a right. Call PM Haile Mariam's government to release all political prisoners, including, of course, Sigrid. Urge Prime Minister Haile Mariam's government to criminalize state-sponsored murders and hold specific officials at the federal and local level accountable for killings, ethnic cleansing, and disappearance. Urge Prime Minister Haile Mariam's government to establish an independent commission consisting of notable Ethiopians and African Union experts, advisors to investigate government crackdowns. I would like to continue, but I'm told I have to stop. So,
Would you mind joining us up on the podium? And we now have Felix, who will be back in contact via Skype. So your questions to Yemi, Felix, and Patricia, Professor Achimaeva, and myself are now welcome. We will take 3 questions at a time and then ask the panelists to comment on them. First, lady on the front there.
Thank you.